For 12 months, she kept a secret from the one person she had always told everything to. Not her friends, not her family, and not even the man she was about to marry. What makes it even more unusual is that it didn't begin as some carefully planned idea or dramatic turning point. There was no single moment where everything suddenly made sense, no late-night realization where she decided to change her life. Instead, it began quietly, almost like a passing thought that most people would ignore. One morning, she woke up earlier than usual, earlier than him, and instead of turning over or going back to sleep, she just lay there staring at the ceiling, letting her thoughts wander further than they normally would. She started thinking about her life, about how quickly everything had moved, and about the fact that in just a few months, she would be walking down the aisle, stepping into a future that, on the surface, already seemed decided. For most people, that moment represents something complete, something final, as if everything has fallen perfectly into place. But for her, there was something unsettled beneath the surface, a quiet feeling she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't a problem in her relationship, and it wasn't a flaw in her life. It was something internal, something personal. It felt as if there was a version of herself she had never fully discovered, a part of her that had never been tested or pushed beyond its limits. And deep down, she knew that if she didn't confront that feeling now, she might never get another chance. So that morning, without telling anyone, without writing it down, or even fully saying it out loud, she made a decision, a quiet, private promise to herself that before she stood at the altar and said, "I do," she would do something completely unexpected, something that wasn't planned, something that wasn't safe, and most importantly, something that belonged entirely to her. The next morning, she left the house early. She told him she couldn't sleep and that she needed some air, and he simply smiled, still half asleep, not questioning it for a second. And just like that, it began. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a harmless routine, something ordinary and easy to explain. But every morning, instead of walking through quiet streets or stopping for coffee, like she said she would, she was driving, further than anyone would expect, out of the city, past the last traffic lights, and beyond the places where people usually turn around. Eventually, the surroundings changed. The buildings disappeared, the roads became quieter, and all that remained was open land stretching out in every direction. And at the edge of it, almost hidden in plain sight, there was a small airfield. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention. There were no crowds, no announcements, and nothing to suggest that anything important happened there. It was just a runway, a few scattered planes, and an instructor who didn't ask too many questions. The first time she sat in the cockpit, everything felt unfamiliar in a way that made her instantly uncomfortable. The space felt too small, the sounds too loud, and her hands didn't seem to belong anywhere. When the engine started, it didn't feel exciting like she might have imagined. It felt overwhelming, like she had stepped into something far bigger than she had expected. The instructor spoke calmly, explaining each step in detail, but her mind struggled to keep up. This wasn't something she had grown up around, and it wasn't something she had ever planned to do. She wasn't one of those people who had always dreamed of flying. She was simply someone who had made a sudden decision to try something that felt completely out of reach. Her first attempts reflected that. The plane barely moved the way it was supposed to, her timing was off, and even the smallest adjustments felt exaggerated. By the third attempt, she was already questioning whether she had made a mistake. Because learning something new is difficult, but learning something this technical, this unpredictable, and potentially dangerous, all while keeping it hidden from the person closest to you, adds a completely different kind of pressure. Every mistake felt heavier, not just because it was a mistake, but because she had no one to share it with. She couldn't come home and admit that it had been a bad day, and she couldn't tell him that she was scared or unsure if she could continue. Instead, she had to pretend that everything was normal, that nothing had changed. And over time, that became its own kind of challenge. Because every day, she found herself living two separate lives, the one he knew and the one he didn't. At home, everything remained exactly the same. They talked about the wedding, made plans for the future, and laughed about things that seemed small and unimportant. But beneath all of that, there was a quiet tension that only she could feel. Sometimes he would ask simple questions, like how her morning had been, and she would answer with a single word, "Good," even though that word barely scratched the surface of what she had experienced. And every time she said it, she felt that slight hesitation, that small pause that reminded her she was keeping something from him, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she wanted to give him something he would never forget. Still, there were moments where everything nearly fell apart. There were days when she came home exhausted, Days when she almost slipped and said too much, and days when the weight of the secret felt heavier than she could carry. More than once, she found herself standing on the edge of telling him everything, ready to stop and let the whole idea go. Because secrets like this don't stay contained. They follow you into conversations, into silence, and into the way you look at someone when they trust you completely. But every time she got close to telling him, she stopped, because deep down, she remembered why she had started, and she knew she wasn't finished yet. As the weeks turned into months, things began to change, slowly at first, and then more noticeably. The controls started to feel more natural, the noise became less overwhelming, and her movements became more precise. Mistakes still happened, but they no longer defined her. In their place, something else began to grow. Confidence, not something loud or obvious, but something steady and consistent. Until one morning, everything came together. The air was still, the sky was clear, and for the first time, nothing felt rushed or uncertain. She moved through the checklist, started the engine, and when the plane began to move, she didn't hesitate. She pushed forward, and this time, everything worked exactly the way it was supposed to. The ground fell away beneath her, not suddenly or violently, but smoothly, as if it had been waiting for her to reach this point. And just like that, she was in the air, alone, without an instructor guiding her, without anyone correcting her, just her and the sky. In that moment, everything else faded away. The stress, the doubt, and the weight of the secret all seemed to disappear, leaving only a sense of clarity. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about what she was hiding. She was thinking about what she was building. Because now, this wasn't just something she was learning. It was something she could use, something she could turn into a moment. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a plan. Fast forward 12 months. The wedding day arrived, and everything looked exactly as it was supposed to. The chairs were arranged, the flowers were in place, and the atmosphere felt calm and familiar. Guests sat quietly, waiting, while soft music filled the space. At the end of the aisle, he stood there, calm and confident, completely certain of what was about to happen. In his mind, the day was already written. She would walk in, everyone would stand, and everything would unfold exactly as expected. But something felt off. At first it was subtle, just a slight delay that didn't seem unusual, but as 1 minute turned into 2, and 2 turned into 5, the atmosphere began to shift. People started whispering, glancing around, checking their phones, wondering what was happening. He looked toward the entrance again, expecting her to appear at any moment, but there was nothing. And then, just as the uncertainty reached its peak, a sound broke through the silence. It was low at first, distant and easy to ignore, but it quickly grew louder, impossible to miss. People turned, confused, trying to understand where it was coming from, because it didn't belong there, not at a wedding. And then someone pointed upward. Above the venue, cutting through the sky, a small plane appeared. At first, no one understood what they were looking at, or why it was there. It circled once, then again, and with every second, it became more obvious that this wasn't random. This was intentional. The groom stepped forward, trying to make sense of it, because something about it felt connected, even if he couldn't explain how. The plane began to descend, aligning perfectly with the runway, its movements controlled and precise in a way that didn't look accidental. It touched down smoothly, too smoothly to be a coincidence. The engine slowed, and a heavy silence settled over the crowd. No one spoke, no one moved, until the door opened, and sitting in the pilot's seat was her, his bride, the same woman who, for 12 months, had been living a completely different life without him ever knowing. She stepped out, still in her wedding dress, completely calm, as if this moment had always been part of the plan. And when he saw her, he didn't react immediately, because moments like this don't register right away. They take time to process. Because what do you do when everything you expected changes in an instant? What he felt wasn't just surprise, it was realization. The realization that the person standing in front of him wasn't different, just deeper than he had ever understood. And as she walked toward him, not down an aisle, but across an airstrip, every step carried the weight of the past 12 months, the effort, the doubt, the secrecy, and the determination. When she finally reached him, she didn't need to explain anything, because he understood, not the details, not the early mornings, and not the struggles, but the meaning behind it all. That this wasn't about flying, it wasn't about the plane, and it wasn't even about the surprise. It was about showing him that even after everything they had shared, there were still parts of her waiting to be discovered. And in that moment, it became clear. This wasn't just a wedding entrance. It was a reminder that no matter how well you think you know someone, they can still find a way to surprise you. And sometimes, that's the most important part.